Hi everyone, welcome to Things Lucy Reads. I'm Luce and this is my September reading wrap up. So I'm going to talk about books in the order that I started reading them because that's the order that I have on my list just here, but it is not necessarily the order that I finished them in. In September I was low-key taking part in Sci-Fi September, which was a readathon run by Sajid and Kathy and two other people whose names escape me just now, but I will put all of their channels in the description bar below so you can check them all out. There was a bingo board for that readathon and I got all of the squares except for 2, and then I got 2 bingos. A book that I read for this readathon but that I didn't finish but that I also wasn't aiming to finish was Dune by Frank Herbert. I've been reading a certain chunk of it every month and I haven't quite finished September's chunk yet, but I counted it anyway, so that counted for the prompts a classic or older book and also popular / hyped, and also the prompt for water. And then also for this readathon I read Stranger Planet by Nathan W. Pyle, and then also in September, but not for the readathon, I read Strange Planet by Nathan W. Pyle. So this comic series has been around for a few years. It was really big there for a while and then just kind of dropped off everyone's radar. But it's just really cute. It's about these aliens doing very quintessential human things which seem commonplace, and then you look at them through the lens of it being done by another species and it just seems completely absurd, but they're really cute and really funny. I'm sure you've seen them around even. I just wanted to read something that was light, that wasn't going to be too emotionally taxing, and these definitely fit the bill. So for the readathon, Stranger Planet covered me for the prompts non-space and alien presence and popular / hyped, and also non-human main character, and I think I gave both of these 5 stars. They were just really easy, like brain palette cleanser, and I thoroughly enjoyed both of them. Then also for this readathon I read the book Binti by Nnedi Okorafor, which I counted for alien presence and global south and short story and recommended. Now the thing about Binti is that before I started reading it I thought it was about this girl from a planet that wasn't Earth going to university, but actually it's from a group of people called the Himba people, and that's a group of people who actually exist. There is a group of people called the Himba people who live in Namibia, and a lot of their cultural practices are present in this book. So they cover their skin and their hair with this substance called ochise, which is like an orange kind of clay covering, and they put it on to clean themselves. It's all explained in the book. And Nnedi Okorafor is not part of this group. She's like borrowing their culture for this book. She seems to have done it very sensitively and properly. I can't speak on it because I'm not from Namibia and I'm not a member of the Himba people. So all of the little cultural elements of Binti's life became much more interesting when I knew that they were based on real people. Not that they weren't interesting to begin with, but you know what I mean. Like, anyway, so Binti is part of the Himba people. She's a really, really good mathematician, and she is accepted into this big, prestigious intergalactic university, and no one from the Himba people has ever been there before, and I think even that they don't even usually accept people from Earth at all. And then on the way to the university, their ship is beset by this alien culture which is at war with this other alien culture, and she basically has the duration of the ship's journey to figure out how to mediate this conflict and resolve it in a way that safeguards her life and safeguards the life of everyone who is currently at the university, because otherwise these aliens would have just arrived there and killed everyone. So she has to figure out a way to prevent that so that everyone can, you know, live and she can still go to uni, and all of this will have been worth it because she basically had to deceive her family to take up her place at the university in the first place. So this was good. I gave it 4 stars. I listened to the audiobook, which was really enjoyable. It's a little bit unsatisfying in that a lot of what happened had been lucky circumstance, but that's also true for a lot of books, and I am definitely interested to read the other 2 books in the trilogy and to see where the story actually goes from there. I would read it again. I would like to read it with my eyes next time because I was reading it while I set up the next month of my journal, and I think I spaced out a little bit in some points, but it was really good and really compelling. And if you think that it sounds interesting, I think that you will enjoy it, and I will definitely be continuing that series. And then the next book that I read, or at least the next book on the list, is The Cybernetic Tea Shop by Meredith Katz, which is a very, very short sort of romance novella, and this one counted for unpopular or unheard of, robot/AI presence, non-space, short story, and queer. So there's this human character, and she's a mechanic, and she also has a lot of wanderlust, so she doesn't stay in one place for very long, and she ends up moving to this town and finds this tea shop that is run by a robot. And in this, it's set on Earth, hence non-space, and in their society, which is set in the future, it has become unethical to create robots that have the intelligence of a human, because then you create them and then they serve you, and it's sort of like slavery. They don't really get much of a choice in the matter, because that's what they have been created to do. So most robots have been decommissioned by now, not many exist, and then she finds this one that does still exist, and it takes you through why the robot is running the tea shop, why it is that she's still running, and because this character is a mechanic, she has the know-how to carry out some repairs on this robot that need repairing, and in the process they come into a little bit of a relationship. It was very sweet and very cute. I gave it 4 stars. I said it's sort of a romance because the human character is hesitant to get into relationships because she's asexual. It doesn't ever mention the word aromantic. I don't think she's intended to be aromantic, but she isn't really interested in relationships in general, and then she meets this robot and then they fall into a relationship, and it works out well because the human is asexual and completely not interested in sex, and the robot has no sex parts anyway, so that's fine. The word asexual is never used to describe the robot. It is just very matter-of-factly stated that she does not have the anatomy required, but she is happy to perform acts if that's what the human wanted, but the human doesn't want it because she's asexual. So ultimately I thought that everything wrapped up really satisfyingly in that book, and I would be happy to read it again. It's my second book by Meredith Katz, and I really loved the first one of hers that I read, so I think I will be definitely reading more books by her as well. And then the last book that I read that I counted for Sci-Fi September is Love in the Time of Global Warming, which I'm also reading for another TBR as well. And then this one covered me for contemporary with sci-fi elements, fantasy elements, queer, and water. So this is a retelling of the Odyssey, and it's sort of post-apocalyptic, except that the apocalypse happens at the beginning of the book, and it's a giant tsunami which basically washes out the west coast of America, and the thing that caused the tsunami and the earthquake that preceded it also turned the rest of the country into a desolate dystopian nightmare. It's giants. This scientist created giants, and then they escaped from the lab, and their steps on the earth made it shake so hard that there was a giant wave, and because they're giants and they have to eat everything, they eat everything that's edible, all of the plants, all of the fruit, all of the livestock, quite a few of the humans. You know, very little of the country is left untouched. This one I gave 3.5 stars. It is a reread. I gave it 5 stars the last time I read it, and I will be discussing this in an upcoming video as well, but I just felt like the vibes of the main character were far too much not like other girls for my taste. And to be fair to this book, it came out a really long time ago, 2013, and I feel like back in 2013 there was a little less of a pushback against protagonists that were not like other girls than there is now. Like, we would not accept a book like this now, but back then it was still annoying, but less of an issue, you know what I mean? If you were around back then, you'll know. Protagonists were just like this. It was part of the course. There were several other things that bothered me, and I go more into them in the other video, but the other thing about it is that for a book that's called Love in the Time of Global Warming, it didn't actually spend a lot of time talking about global warming. It was mostly just concerned with the hole in the ozone layer, which isn't really a concern for us anymore because we've closed it. And I just feel like if the earthquake and the tsunami had been caused by global warming, then this book would have retained its relevance. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Like, this could have been a really prescient, like, relevant book for the next several decades, except that the natural disasters were caused by giants and not by actual global warming, even though the book is called love in the time of global warming. The only thing it really seemed to care about was the hole in the ozone layer. So I just felt like that made it lose a little bit of its relevance. You know, it could have been more, just more, if it hadn't been giants. But it's a retelling of the Odyssey, so it had to have giants. It was only okay for me. I talk about it more in the other video. And then really quickly, also this month I read the Free Comic Book Day issue that contained the Mighty Nein origin story of Nott, and also a story from The Witcher. I didn't really enjoy The Witcher story very much. I couldn't really see the point of it, so I gave that 2 stars, but I gave the Mighty Nein story 4 stars because that was really incredible. A lot of it is spoilery for the campaign, but it was framed as a conversation between Luke and Marion, the Ruby of the Sea, about Veth, who is Luke's mother, and it was just really delightful and really funny. And like it did the thing where they would be saying one thing about Veth and how great she was and how she was a good person, and then it would show like what Veth was doing at that moment, which kind of contradicted what they were saying. But I just really love these characters and I really love this story, so I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I overall gave it 4 stars. Definitely worth checking out if you like the series. The next book that I'm going to talk about is actually the first one that I started in the month, but then it was just so enjoyable that I didn't want it to end, so I think I actually finished it 7th, but it is Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this is the 3rd in the Brown Sisters trilogy, but I haven't read either of the other 2, but they all do stand alone. So even though Chloe and Danny and their partners feature in this book, there's nothing really that you wouldn't understand if you hadn't read those 2 books. First of all, this is probably the funniest book that I've ever read. It was absolutely hilarious. There's a scene where Eve's love interest finds her dildo and like I can't think about it without cracking up laughing. It was so funny, and then was probably one of the best sex scenes I've ever read in a traditionally published novel as well. It was incredible. This whole book is just fabulous. So Eve is the youngest of her 3 sisters, and she doesn't really have a lot of direction in life. She tries a lot of things, but when she doesn't immediately succeed at them, she drops them, because dropping things in the middle is less painful than trying to succeed at them and then failing. Incredibly relatable. And then her parents eventually get tired of her like swapping careers all the time and not sticking with one thing, and they say to her, we're going to cut you off until you can get an adult job and hold it down for a month. Sorry, I'll stop swinging on my chair. So she drives away in a little bit of a sulk and then comes across this bed and breakfast, and the chef of that bed and breakfast has recently won the lottery and quit. So they're in desperate need because there's this gingerbread festival coming up and the owner has already committed to be part of it, and without a chef he can't be part of it. So Eve just sort of accidentally falls into the job because the owner doesn't want to hire her, but then she accidentally hits him with her car and breaks his arm. So luckily Eve is very good at cooking and enjoys it, and so she takes up this job with the help of the owner's best friend, and it goes from there. And to begin with, Jacob, the owner, just really does not like Eve at all, can't wait to be rid of her, but then he becomes more and more impressed by how good she is with the customers, how good she is with the kitchen, just her general demeanor and capability, and she kind of cracks his icy exterior and they become friends, and from friends they become something more, obviously, because this is a romance novel. I really liked how Jacob and Eve just understood each other so well. So we find out very early on in the book that Jacob is autistic, and then he kind of recognizes certain behaviors in Eve that makes him think that perhaps she also is, and he does eventually kind of broach that with her, but in a very kind of gentle, casual, non-invasive way, and I really liked that whole conversation as well. So both of these protagonists are autistic, but only Jacob has a formal diagnosis. Not that a formal diagnosis is a be-all and end-all. Anyway, that's a separate conversation. Despite their rocky beginning, Jacob and Eve just intrinsically understand each other in ways that the rest of the world doesn't understand them, and I thought that that was so lovely and really valuable, and I was uncomfortably reflected in both of them multiple times. So pretty sure I know what that says about me. This book is incredible and I gave it 5 stars, and there were a few certain times where one deliberately didn't tell the other something that was important, but it never strayed into being like an actual miscommunication trope. The worst of it was that Eve was living in Jacob's spare room without Jacob actually knowing about it. That was the worst of it. And like even at the end, when you thought that it was just going to be like the biggest miscommunication ever, both of them kind of sat with what had happened a little bit and thought about it and was like, I can't just let this stand as it is. I have to talk to the other person and resolve this properly. And I thought that that was really incredible as well, and I love it to pieces. And I'm really excited to read the other 2 books in this series because I think it's going to be really, really great. And the last thing that I want to talk about is that you can see from this cover that Eve has lavender braids. And even though she's working in a professional kitchen, like at no point does Jacob ever mention her hair as being unprofessional. Like he loves her hair. He loves the purple braids. Like he thinks that they're ostentatious and ridiculous, but he loves them. Not once does he ever say that having purple hair or having braids is unprofessional in the kitchen, and she likes to listen to music as she works. And the only thing that he says to her is like, please don't do it with AirPods in because the customers might perceive that in a negative light. He understands that she needs the music to be able to do the work, so he says, you know, play it out loud or sing. Either of those is fine, just please don't wear the AirPods. And so I just thought that that was nice. The fact that the hair was never brought up in anything but a positive light, and that he made an accommodation for her without even really having to agonize about it. Like instead of saying you can't have this accommodation, he just asked that she do it slightly differently, and I thought that that was really lovely. I adored this book. Highly, highly recommend it. It's wonderful and satisfying and sexy and fantastic. Just really, really good. Hi, it's Editing Loose here. I'm actually going to end the video here even though it's only half done, because otherwise it's going to be really, really long. And so that's all for this part of the video. As always, if you've read any of these books and you would like to let me know what you thought of them, feel free to do that down below. If you just want to let me know that you were here, then drop me an emoji, heart in your favourite colour, or whatever other one that you fancy, and then I'll know that you watched to the end. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in part 2 of this wrap up. Bye for now.